The drawing was taped to the wall above his bed when Mara walked into the wrong room. She did not know it was the wrong room yet. She only knew that the number on the door matched the number on the paper the intake nurse had pressed into her hand, and that the paper was damp from where she had folded and unfolded it 3 times in the elevator. Theo's room. That was what she was looking for. Room 214, Pediatric Cardiac Recovery, 2nd floor, East Wing. She had been awake for 19 hours, and the corridor all looked the same under the fluorescent panels, and the East Wing and the West Wing shared a central desk during the overnight changeover. And the nurse at that desk had been on the phone when Mara passed, and the number on the door read 214. The man in the bed was not her son. He was awake. That was the first thing she registered. Not sleeping, not sedated, just still in a way that most people in hospital beds are not still. His back straight against the raised mattress, and one arm resting at his side and the other against his chest at the shoulder. The white gauze of a dressing visible above the hospital gown's collar. Dark hair cut close on the sides. A jaw that carried no expression at all. He was looking at the crayon drawing taped to the wall. And when Mara stepped inside, he looked at her instead. And the quality of his attention was something she felt in her sternum before she understood it. She said, "I'm sorry, this is the wrong room," and backed out. She found Theo 11 steps down the corridor in room 214 West, a designation the intake nurse had not bothered to specify. And she sat beside his bed for 4 hours while the monitors beeped their small, steady reassurances, and her son slept off the sedation. She did not think about the man in the other room. She thought about the $14,000 she owed the cardiology practice, and about whether the bus she needed ran before 7 in the morning, and about the half-finished tray of Danish at the bakery she had left uncovered when her sister called. She had a son who drew crayon pictures for a father who never came, and she had a bank account that sat at $43 on the 14th of the month. And those were the facts of her life, and they were heavy enough that there was no room for anything else. That is where Mara had been living for 6 years, inside the weight of Theo's condition and the arithmetic of what it cost. Theo had been born with a congenital heart defect, a small structural irregularity in the left ventricle that the doctors at the Regional Cardiac Center monitored like a slow-moving weather system, not immediately dangerous, not correctable by a single surgery. Managed was the word they used, as if a 6-year-old's heart were a piece of equipment requiring periodic maintenance, rather than a living thing she had made from nothing. The co-pays stacked, the specialist visits, the overnight admissions when the monitoring showed something the practice wanted to watch. $14,000 spread across 2.5 years of careful, perpetual attention. And the practice had sent a certified letter in September indicating that the balance was overdue and that continued care would require a payment arrangement. She had called them back from the break room at the bakery and negotiated $60 a month, which the woman on the phone had accepted with the tone of someone doing Mara a favor she had not earned. Marcus had been gone since Theo was 18 months old. He had not gone quietly. He had stood in the kitchen of the apartment they had shared in the River District and told her that raising a sick kid was not something he had signed up for, that she had let herself go in a way that made it hard for him to remember why he'd been interested in the first place, and that she should find someone with more patience for that kind of life. She had held Theo against her shoulder during this speech, and Theo had been asleep, and she had kept her face level and said, "All right," and meant it as a dismissal rather than an agreement. Marcus had chosen to hear it as agreement. He'd taken his leather jacket and his car and a box of the good kitchen knives and not come back. And Mara had spent one weekend being quietly devastated and then gotten up on Monday and applied for the bakery job and started doing the math. She had been doing the math for 4.5 years, The morning after Theo's admission, Dante Reyes arrived at the pediatric recovery desk at 8:15 and asked for her by name. Mara was in the family lounge with a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold while she read the same paragraph of a waiting room magazine 3 times. And the desk nurse came to find her and said there was a man asking for her and that he seemed very patient and very polite, and that she should probably come to the desk. Mara went. The man at the desk was lean, in his early 40s, wearing a dark coat over a plain gray shirt and carrying nothing. He had the relaxed posture of someone who spent a great deal of time waiting and had made peace with it. And he introduced himself as Dante, an associate of the patient in room 214 East. Mara said, "I walked into the wrong room." Dante said yes, and smiled briefly, as if that were a satisfactory answer to a question neither of them had asked. He said that his employer had asked him to pass along a message. He said that the drawing she had left on the wall had been given to the pediatric floor by her son during an earlier admission 3 weeks prior, and had been redirected to his employer's room in error, and that his employer had kept it and would like to return it in person if she was willing. She had not known about the drawing. Theo had not mentioned it. She thought for a moment about the nurse on the pediatric floor who had a gift for coaxing things out of Theo, small stories and small productions, and about how Theo had a habit of drawing people he wanted and leaving the drawings in places they might find him. He had left one under the pillow of his own hospital bed during a previous admission. He had left one tucked into the pocket of a coat hanging in Mara's closet, and she had found it in February while looking for her transit card, and had held it against her chest for a full minute in the dark of the closet before she trusted herself to move. She said all right, and followed Dante down the corridor. Room 214 East was private, which she had not registered the previous night. Not a standard single room, but a suite with a separate anteroom and a window that faced the parking structure and a second chair positioned opposite the bed. The man, William, was sitting up in the same position as before, his shoulder dressed and his expression level, and on the rolling tray beside the bed, the crayon drawing was laid flat, not taped now, but held down by the corner of a water glass. She saw it from the doorway and felt her throat do something involuntary, because she recognized it. Theo had drawn it in October, she thought, or maybe September, on the back of a paper bag from the pharmacy. He had drawn 2 figures in the scratchy, confident lines of a 6-year-old who knew what he was trying to say, even if the medium resisted him. One figure was small and in yellow, which was Theo's color for himself. The second figure was larger, male by the construction of the shoulders and in red crayon, and the figure's right arm was crossed against its chest in the way a person holds a hurt arm. William had a bandaged shoulder. He had had it the night before, and he had it now. She looked at the drawing, and then she looked at him, and he said, "Your son drew this from the corridor." He said Theo had seen him through the door during an earlier room visit 3 weeks ago, and had recognized something in the posture, and had drawn what he saw, and had asked the floor nurse to give it to the man with the hurt arm. Mara sat down in the second chair because her legs had made the decision for her. She said, "He draws what he wants." That was the thing she had learned about Theo. When he could not have something, he drew it into existence. He drew it and left it where it might be found. And this had been his way of asking for something that Mara had never been able to provide. And she had known it. And she had carried that knowledge the way she carried the medical debt, which was without complaint and without solution. The yellow figure in the drawing had a smaller figure beside it. She had missed this when she first recognized the drawing, because the smaller figure was in pale orange, barely visible against the white paper bag, and it was rounded and held in the red figure's undamaged arm, and it was shaped like a baby. She sat with that for a moment. William was quiet. He did not press her to explain it or to leave. And his containment was not coldness, she thought, though it looked like coldness from a distance. It was something more deliberate than cold. He said, "His name is Theo." She said yes. He said he would like to help with Theo's care if she would permit it. Not as a charity, he said, though he understood she would hear it that way. As a matter of something owed. He said this in the precise, certain register of someone who had already decided and was now informing rather than asking. And she felt the back of her neck prickle, and she said, "I don't know you, and you don't know us." He said, "Not yet. If you have watched a story like this one, and felt that held breath pull of something about to reorganize itself, drop a word in the comments because you are exactly who this was made for, and we will be here every time you come back." She left. She took the drawing. He did not try to stop her. Marcus found her in the parking structure 2 hours later. She had not seen him in nearly 3 months. He looked the same as he always looked, which was presentable in a way that cost him nothing. The leather jacket and the clean shoes and the look of a man whose version of events was the one that mattered. He stepped in front of her cart as she was loading Theo's overnight bag into the back of her second-hand hatchback, and he said, "I heard the kid is in again," and she said yes and kept loading. He said, "You look tired, Mara." He said it with the sympathy of someone pointing out a structural defect in a building they had already decided not to buy. He said that he'd heard she was behind on the medical bills, that it was getting embarrassing, that it made him look bad by association. He said that if she had just been more reasonable when things ended, they could have worked out something practical. She said, "You should go, Marcus," and pulled the cart back toward the return station. He followed her. He said she had always been like this, defensive, closed off, unable to accept when someone was trying to help. He said it was a kind of stubbornness that was going to cost Theo eventually, when the bills got bad enough that she had no options left. He said she needed to be realistic about what she could give a sick kid on a bakery salary. She was facing away from him when she heard the second footstep. Dante's voice came from behind Marcus, level and with no particular urgency, and said that the parking structure was private and that Mr. Rivera's guests were asked to use the east entrance. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch Marcus. He simply positioned himself between Marcus and Mara and waited. And 2 men she had not seen appear stood at either end of the row. And Marcus looked at Dante, and then at the 2 men, and then at his own shoes, and he left. Mara stood at the cart return and waited for her breathing to even out. Dante walked her back to Theo's room. He said, on the way, that Mr. Rivera had asked him to clarify something. He said that the offer of assistance with Theo's care was not contingent on anything. Not on her gratitude, not on her time, not on her agreeing to anything. He said the $14,000 in outstanding copays had been settled that morning with the cardiology practice as a direct payment, and that Theo had an appointment with the senior pediatric cardiologist at the regional center on the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, and that transportation would be provided. He said all of this in the tone of someone relaying a confirmed travel itinerary. She stopped walking. She said, "He can't just do that." Dante said he already did. She said she did not want to owe anyone anything, and Dante said, yes, he understood, and that Mr. Rivera had anticipated that, and that if she preferred to discuss the terms, she could speak with Mr. Rivera directly, but that the appointment on Thursday was confirmed regardless, because the cardiologist had a specific opening and Theo's file had been reviewed, and the doctor wanted to see him. She said, "Reviewed by whom?" Dante said, "By the cardiologist, who had received Theo's records by standard referral." She stood in the corridor for a moment and thought about the $60 a month and the certified letter and the $14,000. And she thought about Theo asleep in room 214 West, with his small chest rising and falling under the monitor's watch. She said, "All right, Thursday." The next 11 days moved in a particular rhythm that she did not fully understand until later. Dante appeared when he needed to appear, at the hospital and at the cardiologist's office, and once at the bakery, where he handed her a card with a phone number and said that Mr. Rivera would like to see the drawing again if she was willing to bring it. She brought it to the private clinic on a Wednesday evening after her shift, still wearing the flower on her forearms, and sat across from William in the anteroom chair and watched him hold the drawing the way Theo held things he had made, with both hands and a specific, unhurried attention. He had been discharged by then, but the clinic had a consulting office he used. She did not ask why a man used a private medical clinic as a meeting room. She was learning to file certain observations in a particular drawer and leave them there. He asked her about Theo, not about the condition in the clinical way the doctors asked, but about Theo as a person, what he liked, what he was afraid of. She told him that Theo liked birds and would go quietly frantic at the window if a pigeon landed on the sill, and that he was afraid of the dark in a specific way. Not general darkness, but the darkness in unfamiliar rooms when he first entered them, and that he had a method for this which involved naming 3 things he could hear until the room became known. William listened to this with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, and when she finished, he said, "That is a good method." She said, "He made it up himself." William looked at the drawing. He said, "The second figure, in orange." She said, "I think that is a baby." She said that Theo had been drawing this lately, a small family, complete in the way he wanted it. A father and a Theo and a baby. She said this without sentiment because there was no room for sentiment in the life she was running. But something in her voice may have registered anyway, because William set the drawing down carefully and said, "What does he want for Christmas?" She said, "His father." Then she looked at the floor. He said, "I know. I mean, what else?" She laughed, which surprised her. It was a short, flat sound, but it was real, and she said, "He wants a bird, a real one. A small finch or something he could keep in the clinic waiting room when he has appointments, because he thinks the other kids in the waiting room would be less scared if there was a bird." William said, "That is a reasonable thing to want." Something in the room shifted. She felt it in the way she always felt shifts, as a slight recalibration in the air, the particular temperature of a space when the people in it have decided something without saying it aloud. She thought about the drawing in his hands, the red figure with its arm held against its chest, and about Theo's gift for drawing what he wanted into existence and leaving it where it might be found. And she thought about the 11 days since she had walked into the wrong room, and about what it cost her to sit here and feel this, and about what it would cost her later if she let it matter. She took the drawing when she left. He watched her take it and said nothing. And she went home on the bus with the drawing in her bag, and Theo asleep at her sister Celia's apartment, and $14,000 no longer hanging over her like a held breath. She did not sleep easily. She sat on the floor of the kitchen she rented and looked at the drawing under the overhead light. And she saw, for the first time with real attention, that the second figure in red was not just a man with a bandaged shoulder. The hair was drawn in short, careful lines on the sides of the head. The figure was standing straight, with weight, in the way Theo drew people he trusted. The baby in orange was held with both arms of the red figure, not just the unhurt one. 11 days. Her son had seen William Rivera through a doorway for 20 seconds 3 weeks ago, and had drawn a family. She put the drawing face down on the kitchen table and stayed there a long time. The next morning, she called Dante's number and said she needed to speak with William. Not at the clinic. Somewhere that was hers or close to it, meaning the corner table at the bakery on a Tuesday when the morning rush had cleared. He came at 9:40 without Dante, in a coat that had no business being in a neighborhood bakery. And she put a coffee in front of him without asking how he took it. Black, because she had already read that from the 3 times Dante had ordered for him. She sat down and said, "I need to tell you what you're walking into." She told him about Theo's condition, the specifics, the monitoring schedule, the probability curves the cardiologist used, the likelihood of an intervention in the next 3 years. She told him about the debt, the $60 a month, the certified letter, what it had felt like to read it in the break room. She told him about Marcus, not with bitterness, but with the flat accuracy of a person who had processed the information and was now transmitting it. She said, "His father is not a good man, and he is not a present one, and Theo has built an entire interior life around a father figure that does not exist. And I need you to understand that before you get any closer, because my son falls for people completely, and he cannot afford to fall for someone who leaves." William put both hands flat on the table, the way he did when he was about to say something he meant fully, and he said, "I don't leave things I've chosen." She said, "How will I know if you've chosen?" He said, "You already know." She held that. The bakery smelled like yeast and cinnamon, and the industrial cleaner her co-worker Josie used on the display case every morning. And the light through the front window was the thin winter light of late November, and it was the most ordinary room she had been in for 11 days. And the man across from her was not an ordinary man, and she was tired of pretending she had not noticed. She said, "All right." She took him to meet Theo that afternoon. Celia was there, and she watched from the kitchen doorway with the expression of a younger sister who has opinions she's been asked to hold. Theo was on the couch under his bird blanket, a blue fleece printed with illustrated finches. And when William sat down on the floor beside the couch and said, "I heard you know about birds," Theo looked at him for a long moment with the concentrated assessment of a 6-year-old who has been disappointed by adults and has learned to check carefully before he decides. And then said, "I know 19 species." William said, "Tell me one." Theo said, "The zebra finch." He said the zebra finch makes its nest from the same materials every time, grass and feathers and a little soft fluff, and always builds it in a high place where no one can reach it, and raises the same young in the same nest for years, and that when it sings, it sounds like a question. William said, "Yes, it does." Celia, in the kitchen doorway, pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling. The 5 weeks that followed moved in the warm accumulation of small things. A bird cage arrived at Celia's apartment on a Wednesday, containing a pair of small zebra finches in charcoal and white, with a card that said only, "For the waiting room. But you can keep them until the next appointment." Theo named them both within 4 minutes. William appeared at Theo's next 3 cardiologist visits and sat in the chairs that were too small for him with the same patient stillness he brought everywhere, and asked the kind of careful questions that told the cardiologist he had read Theo's file and thought about what he read. Mara watched this and felt the interior calculus she had been running for 6 years begin, cautiously, to change its inputs. She was at the safe apartment on the 22nd floor for the first time when Dante called with the intelligence briefing. She had been there 4 days by then, having moved after a figure she did not recognize twice in 2 days near her rented kitchen. And William had said, "You and Theo will stay here." Not as a request, but as a fact. And she had let it be a fact because Theo had gotten his first look at the city from 22 floors up and had pressed his nose against the floor-to-ceiling window and said, I can see the whole place from here," with a wonder in his voice that she had not heard since the summer. The safe apartment was stocked with things in her exact sizes, soft sweaters and warm socks, and a refrigerator with the specific brand of almond milk Theo needed for his morning routine. And she thought about who had noticed those details and felt something in her chest that she did not have the correct vocabulary for, and did not try to name. She named it later, on the fourth night, when William came and they sat together after Theo slept, and she told him about the first winter after Marcus left. The radiator that did not work and the space heater she rationed because of the electric bill, the way she had slept in her coat for 3 nights before she called her mother for help, and her mother had sent $40. William listened with both hands quiet on the table, and when she finished, he reached across and covered her hand with his. And the quality of the touch was not urgent. It was careful. The way you handle something you have already decided is yours to protect. She turned her hand over. The first real intimacy between them, built across those nights with the particular slowness of 2 people who have been careful for a long time and are choosing, deliberately, to stop. There was the night she fell asleep on the couch and woke to find he had placed a blanket over her without waking her, and was sitting in the chair across the room reading something on his phone. And she said, "You didn't have to stay." And he said, "I know." There was the night she told him she had never asked anyone for anything, and he said, "I know that too." And the way he said it made her understand that he had been watching her not ask for weeks and had been arranging things so that the asking was not required. There was the night she stood at the window at 2 in the morning looking at the city lights below. And he came and stood beside her and said, "What are you counting?" And she said, "I'm not counting." And he said, "You count things when you can't sleep, I've noticed." And she had not known she did that. And the fact that he had noticed it before she had was something she held in her chest like a small, specific warmth. There was the night she said, "I'm scared of this," meaning all of it, the whole arrangement, the cost of trusting it. And he said, "You should be." He said, "The world I run is not a quiet one, and I won't pretend it is. But you are inside the perimeter now, and the perimeter holds." He said this without drama, as a statement of engineering. And she believed it the way she believed the cardiologist's monitoring charts, because it was delivered with the same precision and the same refusal to romanticize. And there was the night she said yes. Not in those words, but in the way she turned toward him and let herself be entirely visible. The tired body and the flower-rough hands and the 6 years of careful, sufficient managing, and the way he received all of it, steady and unhurried, as if she were something he had been waiting a long time to see clearly. She did not know that night that Soren Bathieu knew her name. Dante brought the intelligence 11 days later, at 8 in the morning, standing at the kitchen counter with his coat still on, and his expression running about 30% more taut than his usual register. He told them that Soren Bathieu ran a distribution outfit that had been testing William's Eastern Corridor for 8 months, and that Bathieu had recently acquired a particular piece of leverage that he intended to use. Dante said that Marcus, whose debts to Bathieu's outfit ran to approximately $22,000, had provided Bathieu with Theo's name, medical schedule, and the clinic's address in exchange for a debt reduction. Mara sat with her hands flat on the table. Dante said that Bathieu's approach was to take the thing that mattered and wait. He said the window for a move was narrow because Theo had a cardiology appointment the following morning, and the route between the apartment and the clinic was the one variable Bathieu's people had tracked. William said, "Change the route." Dante said, "We did. The route was changed at 5 this morning. Bathieu's people moved last night." Mara looked at William. She said, "Where is Theo?" Theo had been at Celia's overnight. Celia, who had taken him for what was supposed to be a cousin's dinner and a sleepover with Celia's daughter, had not answered her phone since 11 the previous evening. Dante said Celia was fine. She had been located at a neighbor's apartment and was not harmed, but had been separated from Theo during a brief disturbance outside the building, and that Theo had been taken in the confusion by two of Baciu's men to a warehouse in the Port District, and that the location had been confirmed by Dante's own people 40 minutes ago. Mara said, "Then we go." William said, "Mara." She said, "I know where that clinic bag is." She said it precisely, without volume. She said that during Theo's second-to-last admission, 3 weeks before she had walked into the wrong room, the pediatric nurse had shown her how to administer the sedative injector they kept in the emergency kit for children who went into acute distress. Because Theo had a history of this, and there had been a situation where Mara had needed to act before the nurse arrived. She said the injector was in the external pocket of the clinic bag that lived in the hall closet of the safe apartment. She said she was not waiting in the apartment while her son was in a warehouse in the Port District. William and Dante had a brief exchange with their eyes that settled into Dante leaving the room and returning with the clinic bag and a second coat. The warehouse was a cold, concrete space that smelled of salt and diesel. Dante's people had established the perimeter 40 minutes before they arrived, and the approach was quiet. 2 cars and no lights on the service road. And Mara sat in the back of the second car with the clinic bag on her knees and her thumb on the cap of the injector, and thought about Theo naming 3 things he could hear in an unfamiliar room. What she had not told William or Dante, because there was no time and it would not have changed her decision, was that Baciu's men would not expect the mother. The warehouse had a side door on the loading bay that Dante's people had identified as lightly held. She went through it while William's team moved on the main entrance. She had 12 seconds of unobserved movement inside the space before the man sitting nearest Theo registered the side door. And in those 12 seconds, she crossed the concrete floor to where Theo was sitting against a crate with his bird blanket across his knees, and she administered the injector to the man's neck before he completed the turn. And she held Theo's face in both hands and said, "I'm here. Name 3 things you hear," and Theo said, "Your voice, and the door, and Dad." She looked up. William was in the doorway. She did not cry. She held Theo against her shoulder and stood up and walked toward the door, and William put his hand at her back as she passed. Not gripping, just present. The weight of a choice that had already been made. And she walked Theo out into the cold, salt air while Dante's people finished the work. Baciu's decision to use a child as leverage turned out to be the specific miscalculation that ended his operation's eastern presence. The cold procedural work happened without Mara present and was completed before morning. And Dante briefed her on it the following afternoon with the same tone he used for cardiologist appointments, which she appreciated. Marcus was located at a motor court 40 minutes south of the city by the following Thursday, and the debt he owed Baciu's now-dissolved outfit was converted, by a transaction she did not ask about, into a formal legal agreement in which Marcus surrendered any claim to custody or interference in Theo's medical decisions in exchange for a cleared account. The agreement was witnessed. He signed it in the presence of 2 men, whose presence made the signing straightforward. Dante brought her a copy. She read it once, folded it, and put it in the filing box where she kept Theo's medical records. She was at the cardiologist's office the following Tuesday when Dr. Vasquez, who was 63 and had spent 30 years in pediatric cardiology and did not use soft language, told her and William together that Theo's latest imaging showed a measurable stabilization in the ventricular wall's behavior, consistent with the new medication regimen and the reduction in environmental stress, and that the intervention window she had been forecasting for the next 3 years had moved. Not gone, but moved. She said it in the flat, satisfied tone of someone who is reporting a fact she finds scientifically interesting. And Mara held William's arm without thinking about holding it. And he turned his hand over and held hers back. Theo, sitting on the examination table in his paper vest, said, "Can we tell the Finches?" They were home by 4. Theo fell asleep with the bird blanket pulled to his chin and the Finches making their question-shaped sounds in the corner of the room. And Mara stood in the kitchen of the safe apartment that had become, by accumulation and without formal announcement, simply the apartment where they lived, and thought about the drawing. She found it in the hall closet, in the front pocket of the clinic bag, where she had tucked it after the last appointment. She brought it into the living room and stood in front of the window with the city below and the December light thinning into early dark. And she looked at the 2 figures and the small orange shape between them, and the red figure's careful arms and the short lines on the sides of its head. William came and stood beside her. She said, "He knew." He said, "Yes." She said, "Before we did." He said, "Children draw what they want to be true, and sometimes they're right." She looked at him. She had been looking at him for weeks with the careful assessment she used on everything, rooms and invoices, and the quality of a person's attention. And what she saw had not changed in the looking. A man who aimed his capability outward and kept nothing for his own comfort and had arranged $14,000 and a cardiologist and a pair of Finches and a 22nd floor window over the city before she had known what to call what was happening between them. She handed him the drawing. He carried it to the wall beside the window and held it there, and she went to the kitchen drawer for the tape. The holiday fell on a Thursday that year, and William's family came, which was a thing she had not been prepared for, which meant 7 people in a space designed for 3, and his mother, who spoke to Mara in plain, careful English and brought a dish that took 4 hours and smelled like something Mara's grandmother had cooked, and 2 cousins who argued good-naturedly about the correct preparation of a thing neither of them was cooking, and Dante, who arrived at 6 with a bottle of something and a wrapped gift for Theo that contained an illustrated field guide to North American songbirds, and set it on the table with the deadpan gravity of a man completing a security operation. Celia arrived at 6:30 with her daughter and a tray of pastries from the bakery, and stood in the kitchen doorway watching the room for a long moment before she said to Mara in a low voice, "All right. Just all right." As if she had been holding a verdict and had finally delivered it. Theo sat between William and Mara at the table, the bird blanket draped over the back of his chair because he brought it everywhere. And he ate more than he usually ate, which was a thing the cardiologist had mentioned as a positive indicator. And he told William's cousin about zebra finches for 12 uninterrupted minutes. And William's cousin listened with the complete attention of a man who has been told by his employer to be interested, and then found that he actually was. After dinner, William's mother helped Theo carry the field guide to the couch, and they began identifying birds together, her finger moving across the illustrated pages and his moving with it. And Mara stood at the window with a cup of coffee that was still warm and looked at the city below and the lights coming on in the buildings across the distance. The particular December arrangement of light over a city that has briefly decided to be beautiful. William came and stood beside her. He did not say anything. The room behind them was warm and loud with his family and her sister and Dante sitting in the chair nearest the door out of professional habit. And Theo's voice asking a question about the painted bunting and the finch's small repeating sound from the corner. She leaned against him. He put his arm around her, the right arm, the healed one, and held her there against the window while the city did its winter work below. On the wall beside the window, in a thin frame he had bought from the hardware store on the block, Theo's drawing was taped flat against white backing. 2 figures in red and yellow, a small orange shape cradled between them, The paper had a crease across the lower corner from all the times it had been folded and carried and found. And the frame did not quite fit the dimensions of a paper bag. So one edge stood slightly proud of the backing. Theo had drawn a family in crayon and left it where it might be found. It had been found.